minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to start by thanking our witnesses for being here. In particular, I want to thank our friend from Prince George who served our community and our province, retired Superintendent Sean Wright, for being here. Mr. Wright, earlier this year you called BC's drug decriminalization experiment one of the biggest public policy disasters in our province's history. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yes. Basically, my experience with that was it led to a marked increase in incidents of public disorder within the community that I was policing at the time, and had significant negative effects in that regard, resulting in a lot of complaints from the community, both community residents and business owners, and made things very difficult for police to intervene in those behaviors of open drug use and disorder.
How have our communities changed over the last, say, 8 years?
I would say there's been what I would describe as a dark turn with regards to disorder on the streets. Case in point, eight years ago, approximately, I arrived in Prince George. A lot more of public disorder was fueled by alcohol consumption. While still not great, things definitely have taken a darker turn over the last couple of years, with the primary agitator, I guess, causing a lot of those public disorder incidents is now illicit drug use, and opioids in particular, and it's much more pervasive and just has a darker and more threatening tone.
Can those that are struggling with addiction make informed decisions?
It's been my experience that no. In general, they make poor decisions. Many of them are homeless, living in very, very poor conditions, and it's evident that they are not capable of making informed decisions for their own best benefit.
There's been a lot of talk in our province, Premier Eby as well as John Rustad and our leader have talked about providing those that are addicted two streams. Involuntary care. In your opinion, would that work?
I believe that would definitely be an additional tool which would be very useful. As previously discussed, I think a lot of people under the influence of opioids and other drugs are not in a position to determine which path they truly want to go down.
We've had witnesses even here tonight that talk about criminalization, perpetuating stigma, what have you. Is that your opinion as well?
Sorry,
in terms of involuntary care or walking back decriminalization, would that do you believe that would contribute to stigma with those that are struggling with addiction?
To be honest, even prior to the introduction of decriminalization, amongst a large proportion of the population, it was my experience there wasn't a tremendous amount of stigma.
Should safe supply drugs have markers for traceability?
I think that would be very useful for police and government agencies in tracing it if it is diverted from its intended use.
You are here, essentially you're bringing the voices of the thousands of men and women that serve our communities all across our nation. Can you speak to whether officers on the ground have had reservations about decriminalization and safe supply? Because the message we're getting from our frontline officers are that there was significant concern with this, but yet we still went down that path.
I would say that that's an accurate, from my experience in my community, that's an accurate depiction that the frontline was not particularly supportive. However, they're not always supportive of policies implemented from management. But yes, I would say that's a fair characterization that the frontline officers were not particularly supportive.
Is safe supply being diverted and trafficked by organized crime?
My experience is yes.
In northern and rural communities like Prince George, do northern and or rural communities like Prince George have the resources to curb the flow of fentanyl and other deadly illegal drugs into our communities?
I would say it's very problematic, and the example I'll provide is the community of Prince George. A municipality of approximately 80,000 people, so the only resources, or the vast majority of resources we have to focus on are municipally funded, which really provide enough policing service to kind of maintain law and order and conduct criminal investigations, but in order to do large proactive drug trafficking investigations, it's extremely problematic for communities of that size in a remote area.
What are the flaws in how Safe Supply has been implemented?
It's my observation that the biggest flaw with that program is that individuals are provided up to several dozen pills and allowed to proceed out the door with them. And there's no mechanism to determine or ensure that they are used appropriately by that individual and not diverted elsewhere.
Thank you, Superintendent Bright. Next.
And I want to thank the witnesses for being here. I guess a little bit to follow up on some of the questions that have come so far. I know back in, I think it was April or March of 2024, Prince George came out saying that you guys had found Safe Supply pills in your region. I was wondering, how can you confidently say that drugs that were seized in Prince George were in fact government, taxpayer-funded Safe Supply drugs?
Yeah, I believe with regards to that initial media release, it was our belief because they were similar to and believed to be from Safe Supply or prescribed supply. However, we conducted further investigations and made observations that determined that safer supply was indeed being diverted into the illicit market.
Thank you. So it's not something that you guys just went out and decided that because it looked like these drugs that they were, you actually did a series of investigations on this? Correct.
And we had received complaints of diversion prior to that as well.
So I want to go back a little bit. What did you see in the aftermath of British Columbia's disastrous move towards the legalization of hard drugs in your community of Prince George?
I would say the most significant impact was a noticeable increase in crimes of disorder, or not crimes of disorder necessarily, but public disorder, particularly in the downtown core, but in other areas of the city. So it really reduced the livability of the community for many people who experienced an environment of increased public drug use, particularly from individuals perhaps with their children that no longer wanted to shop at particular stores because there were persons openly smoking drugs on the sidewalk nearby.
I know as a mom of young kids, I had many moms reaching out to me, sharing the stories that they had about children's playgrounds being littered with drug paraphernalia, people using drugs in public parks and playgrounds, disrupting their paths of travel. How did the community of Prince George specifically react to the disastrous legalization project?
I would say it's very similar. We received quite a number of complaints. I received complaints personally on a daily basis from business leaders and members of the community with regards to those issues.
So at the same time that you saw this massive policy shift moving towards making it legal for people to be able to possess and use up to 2.5 grams of fentanyl, crack, cocaine, and a number of other drugs, did you see any increases into your community for treatment and recovery supports?
No, I did not.
Okay. That seems like a bit of a struggle, because if you're going to make a massive policy change, remove tools from law enforcement, and then in turn not provide any supports on the other side, did this normalize drug use in the community?
I would say that's a fair characterization that open drug use was certainly normalized. There were issues prior to that, but it certainly made it commonplace.
Thank you. So I'm just going to move really quickly over to Mr. Rolfe. I'm just wondering, how many lives have been saved in your housing programs with the use of evidence-based opioid agonist therapy medications like methadone or Suboxone?
It's actually a difficult number to actually track. It's more along the lines of who is actually using Suboxone. And really it comes down to the availability of the prescribers coming into the program, the availability of primary care.
So you guys aren't able to track which one of your people that are living in your facilities are using these opioid agonist therapies?
Yeah, we can. It would be possible to come up with a number of people who are on Suboxone, yes.
Okay. How important is it to have access to qualified addiction specializing prescribers so that people that are looking for those off-ramps can actually get that treatment?
It's critical. I think, as I said in my remarks, I think supportive housing is key in that it creates a place of stability where treatment can actually begin. People have an address, which means that they can actually get linked to primary care, which means they can get referrals to where they need to go.
Thank you, Mr. Rolfe. Thank you, Ms. Goodrich.
Mr. Wright, earlier this year, Dr. Bonnie Henry testified to the committee that she was in favor of legalizing hard drugs like fentanyl, meth, cocaine, and heroin. In your opinion, would that make the crisis worse?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Did the province inform RCMP leaders in BC about the metrics they were using to determine whether decrim was working?
I was not privy to those communications, but I would imagine so, but I don't have specific information.
Okay. Thank you. And I'll cede my time to...
Thank you. So I just want to go back. You said that there was no mechanism to track diversion of safe supply in British Columbia prior to you guys actually finding it in Prince George, doing all the investigations. So there was no mechanism. So that means when the RCMP came and said that there was no widespread diversion, they didn't actually know that there was widespread diversion. Is that correct?
That may indeed be the case.
So, to me, it's exceptionally troubling that there was no mechanism to track if this massive change of policy of providing highly potent opioids to people that are struggling with addiction, giving them large quantities of this, sending them home, and there was no actual process to track and see if they were being trafficked into our communities.
Yeah, I would agree that is troubling. My experience with the health sector with regards to decriminalization, and I'll go back as far as marijuana when it was introduced as for medical purposes. Health Canada had the lead on that, but there was little appetite or ability to conduct enforcement, and I see basically a similar occurrence in this case that health rolls out policies, but they don't have the inclination or the resources to adequately police it on the back end.
One piece, so I know in my home province of Alberta, police officers have been told not to charge for simple possession for a number of years. How long have law enforcement in British Columbia been told not to charge for simple possessions prior to this legalization pilot project coming out?
I would say it's probably about 20 years would be since it was common practice to charge individuals for simple possession.
And when did you guys use that tool of charging someone for simple possession when that was part of your toolkit?
It was a useful tool to gather evidence towards larger drug trafficking investigations against drug trafficking networks and that sort of thing. It was a particularly useful tool.
So effectively, when the government decided to embark on this lunatic process of legalizing hard drugs in British Columbia, they removed tools allowing you to not be able to do your job as well.
That's correct.
So one of the things you said earlier is that the decriminalization increased the number of complaints of social disorder noticeably. Do you know why that happened, or what were the observations you had around that?
My opinion is that it normalized behaviors in public spaces that were previously not acceptable. Smoking meth on a sidewalk out front of a business was not typically something that would occur before. There was drug use for sure in some open areas, but it became more predominant, and that just led to an increase in calls for open drug use and that sort of thing, which we were really powerless to address at that point in time.
Okay, so you said that you guys witnessed this so-called safe supply being trafficked into community, diverted people. So did you see that fueling fentanyl use and crime in your community?
Yes, because we saw individuals who were prescribed so-called safer supply who would immediately either trade it directly for fentanyl or sell it in order to seek stronger street drugs elsewhere.
So effectively, the government became the drug dealer.
That would be one perspective. Yes, it adds to the supply to some degree.
That is incredibly frustrating. I know we had a mom here who said that the government became the drug lord when her son was prescribed this so-called safe supply. Would you agree with that statement?
I might not choose those words, but yes, I do.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Thank you, Ms. Goodrich. Next, Dr. Hanley, please, for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I'll add my voice to thanking the witnesses for being here. One of the things we haven't talked much about, Mr. Wright, really is related to drugs coming into this country or drugs being manufactured here. We certainly have heard recently about the massive drug bust that has happened, the guns and other quantities of cash, et cetera, that were seized at the same time. Obviously, you know, part of your jurisdiction is some parts of BC. And can you tell the committee a little bit about, perhaps, if you have had experience around drugs coming into this country, precursor drugs perhaps, and also a little bit around are these illicit drugs being made here in Canada?
Yes, thanks for the question. I don't have a particular amount of experience with regards to the transnational, international nature of it. However, over several years, really when the fentanyl crisis started, the majority was being imported. It's now my understanding that much of it is actually being manufactured in Canada as a source country now. And I would say a lot of that has to do with what is my understanding of fairly lax controls with around precursor chemicals in this country as opposed to some other countries such as the United States.
Or perhaps even the UK, which makes those precursor substances illegal until they are made legal. Is that not the case?
I don't have knowledge of that, but I would agree with that, yes.
Thanks very much. And I'll make the chair aware I am going to move a motion that I brought forward on Friday, and I apologize to the witnesses, although this is certainly germane. The concern from the Conservative side is that there's much more to be learned about this particular topic, and as I said, that motion was tabled on Friday, November 1st, and Chair, I'll just read that motion if that's appropriate. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, given recent reports from the British Columbia Coroner Service that the death rate from illicit drugs among women and girls is up 60% from 4 years ago, the committee extended study on the opioid epidemic and toxic drug crisis in Canada for 3 additional meetings to deal specifically with the dramatic impact of the opioid crisis on women and children. Chair, I mean, obviously that this is another extension of this meeting. I think that it's very clear to Canadians who are paying attention to this committee and hearing the testimony that's been presented that the NDP Liberal experiment related to opioids and providing the so-called safe supply and illicit drug dens is not helping the situation. And I find it odd, too, Chair, often what we hear from interested parties is that it's now necessary to provide evidence as to why these practices should be stopped, when indeed there was no evidence they should have been started in the beginning, only except for ideological purposes. So that being said, continuing to hear from people who have worked on the front lines and seen the devastation wrought on communities, and again, specifically with women and girls, I think that it's time that we continue this study. Thank you.